Let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to Hugh Lovatt, who is a senior policy fellow with the Middle East and North Africa programme at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Brussels. That was Israel's single deadliest operation in the West Bank in some 2 decades. How's it come to this?
Well, unfortunately, what we've seen today, although it has been the highest death toll, as you mentioned, it's not actually out of the ordinary. I actually think in the West Bank, at least in the northern West Bank, we've been in at least a low-intensity conflict between Palestinian armed groups and Israel for at least the last year. We've seen a number of frequent, almost daily Israeli raids into northern West Bank towns, especially Nablus and also Jenin. Seen within context, unfortunately, what's happened today is not unexpected. And I think it also points to the very real possibility of increased escalation as the months go on.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that in just a moment, but I want to go to the announcement by the Palestinians that they're ending their security coordination with the Israelis, or at least they're suspending it. Is that significant?
If they do it, it is pretty significant. Suspending security coordination with Israel is something that the Palestinian Authority and its president, Mahmoud Abbas, have threatened on a number of occasions. But in very few instances has Abbas actually carried through with this threat. He's actually described security coordination as sacrosanct. So if he does it, what you'd see is quite likely increased friction between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian security forces, and probably also increased freedom of action for Palestinian armed groups.
Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is supposed to be traveling to Egypt, Israel and the West Bank next week. What can he usefully do or say during that visit to try to de-escalate things?
To be quite frank, probably actually very little, because the issues that we're confronting today have been, as I said, months, if not years in the making. Part of the reason we are where we are today is because there has been quite a significant political disengagement by the United States and also by European capitals. So the problems, the mistakes, and the challenges that have accumulated over the last months and years are not easily undone. Now, having said that, if the Americans really are interested in doing something, then I think a renewed political commitment that can actually start forging a new political horizon to end the occupation would be something that might have an impact. But again, the Americans have, or at least the Biden administration has so far shown very little interest in doing that, and doing very little beyond trying to address individual flare-ups of violence.
And of course, the new right-wing government, the most right-wing government in Israeli history, headed up by Benjamin Netanyahu, perhaps not conducive to any cracks of light that there might have been beforehand, and a renewal of will to perhaps reinvigorate the peace process.
Indeed. As I've said, I think at least Israeli policy towards the Palestinians has actually been pretty continuous, whether under previous Netanyahu governments or the past government led by Yair Lapid. But it's quite clear that this government is far more right-wing than previous ones and has pledged to take a far more hard-line response towards Palestinians. So in many regards, whether we're talking about dynamics on the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount or within the West Bank, where Israel continues to expand its settlement project, I think a much more hard-line policy will continue will flare up an already tense and I think insecure situation in the West Bank.
And just lastly, before we go, I mean, just to pick up on what you were saying earlier about a possible escalation, I mean, where do you see things heading to in the days and weeks to come?
So I've been working on this file for quite some time, and I always try not to warn about a renewed Intifada. So the second Intifada happened between 2000 2005, and so a very significant period of violence, claiming hundreds of lives on both sides. So I won't say that, but I think it's quite clear that when we look at the dynamics on the ground, we are decidedly heading in that direction because of all the dynamics I just mentioned, but also the loss of legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority, its weakening, but also now the growing resurgence of Palestinian armed groups and the growing remilitarization of Palestinian society. So I think when you put that against a very febrile and very tense and explosive context, I think there's reasons to be very worried about what may happen this year.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Hugh Lovatt at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you.